Kamala's America. The nightmare scenarios, what are they? Some would say, like myself, that the nightmare scenarios would include a march to globalism, the surveillance state, rewriting or subverting our Constitution. Let's find out what our very esteemed guest thinks. Joining me is the Mel K. Uh, Mel is a conservative journalist, filmmaker, and podcaster. She is host, and I follow her on X. I love her stuff. I get every post, by the way. Mel K is the host of The Mel K Show, which launched back in 2020 after she gained attention for an investigation into the disappearance of just $800 million in taxpayer funds. So she has authored a new book that's coming out in about a month, Americans Anonymous, Restoring Power to the People, One Citizen at a Time. Mel, what is the nightmare scenario of Kamala America?
Well, I think first we have to understand, above and beyond everything else, that America has been captured by what I call a global public-private partnership. It's somewhat of an oligarch of billionaires. We know most of their names. They are running the United States of America as if they are the parent company of this country above our government. And they've gotten away with this for a very long time. Certainly, I believe the 2008 crash was a controlled demolition leading to where we are now, which is what they call global governance. But it's gone through many names and many iterations. And I think the most important thing to know is that in 2015, Barack Obama signed this country on to a global agenda known as Agenda 2030, formerly Agenda 21. Well, when Barack Obama signed us onto that without the consent of the governed, without telling us what it meant, I said, well, what is that? Well, Agenda 2030 is a document out of the UN and World Economic Forum, which are and have been basically one in the same, one hand of two sides since Kofi Annan. So when you first think about it, people say, oh, World Economic Forum is just a think tank. No, it is not. It is part of this octopus of global control that was created by Kissinger and funded by Rockefeller, as many other things have been, Brzezinski, a whole bunch of people. But what has happened over time is that the banking and, as I call them, the multinational corporations have kind of made their way into the halls of power all the way through the executive branch and everywhere else towards a goal that is to end nation states. Agenda 2030's entire thing is about ending nation states, having regionalization instead of actual sovereign nations run by a small group of technocrats and basically a totalitarian global public-private partnership that considers themselves stakeholders of planet Earth. And that means that they believe that that it's theirs to control, and not just, planet Earth, but I'm talking about all nature, natural resources, humans, animals, everything should be under their control. And they've built this 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They all sound great on the surface, but if you dig into what it is basically a global totalitarian communism run by technology. And that technology, they call it the global public infrastructure. And it's, in their words, it is to ensure that we all nations on the planet meet the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. What many people do not know is that in September of 2023, Biden-Harris put out a document, and it's the Commitment to Global Goals. And when you look at this document, the first line is Barack Obama signed us on in 2015 to Agenda 2030, and that Biden-Harris will achieve Agenda 2030 not only in America, but lead the world to this new global governance model run by stakeholders that are self-anointed by the globalist billionaire oligarchy. And in that document, it lists basically the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with about $3 trillion of American taxpayer money going to all global institutions. So the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, but also to small NGOs that aren't small, but that are tentacles of the UN. So the World Health Organization, UNESCO, All of this money, $3 trillion are allocated there. The World Food Program, everything having to do with the world, nothing having to do with the United States, let alone our border, our infrastructure, anything like that. So they put that out in September of 2023. What I did notice after that when I went back is that all of the executive orders that Biden, as I call him, dropped when he came into office, all of them are basically undoing Donald Trump's attempt to get out of this plan, to get out of this agenda. So when Donald Trump was there, which a lot of people don't pay attention to, he pulled us out of UNESCO. Well, all of the subversion of our education system is basically coming through UNESCO, through the global education union, to the two teachers unions that are totally corrupt to the core in America and being spewed onto our children against our will, I think the majority. That's UNESCO. He pulled us out of the World Health Organization, which is essentially a giant money laundering, vaccine pushing, Chinese Communist Party, Bill Gates operation. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords, which goes back to, of course, the fraud that is the limits of growth out of the Club of Rome, also Rockefeller funded. Nothing to do with Rome. It's about Rockefeller's Bellagio estate in Italy. And the limits of growth was the beginning of convincing the masses that everything was global. So you remember in Rio with Clinton and Al Gore, that was when they started talking about global warming and all of the global things that we had to deal with, climate and everything. And since then, it's been global warming, global pandemic, global war, global misinformation. Everything has been global, but they've been feeding that into our children for now 2 decades, and much without our seeing. At the same time, what also happened was a total, as they say, a march through our institutions, which started right after World War II with Operation Paperclip. But even worse is that continued, and then the mentors of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, the Weather Underground, Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers, had their entire Weather Underground and all those groups in the 60s that wreaked a lot of havoc. And the truth is that they then infiltrated, I believe, the Ivy League schools. A lot of people that were involved in that ended up being professors in schools of journalism and schools of education at the highest level: Columbia, University of Chicago, Harvard. So also, while they've been infiltrated, they've also infiltrated with a Marxist, communist type ideology that has been normalized, in my opinion, since Barack Obama got into office in many different ways. So where we are now, which is absolutely terrifying, are two choices. Whether you like Trump or do not like Trump, Trump is sand in the gears to the global governance model. All of the immigration around the world is being coordinated by the global public-private partnership. All of the pandemic and the drug trade and all of these things are creating something that is known as order out of chaos. And what they're doing is they're creating the problems. They're funding both sides of the war. They're funding the immigration out of control all over, violating borders, every sovereign nation they can, because they want to move to what Kissinger laid out in a document, which was basically a super class of people that rule over the subjects, essentially, of different regional groups. The first regional group, which actually was funded by the Marshall Plan after World War II, is the EU. And the EU is functioning like that. So later in Biden's regime, he put in the Declaration of North America, where basically this is building the regionalization of North America, eliminating borders between Mexico, America, and Canada. And so this is all documented. And this goes back to the beginning of the UN, which I believe to be the second biggest fraud on America, the first being the Federal Reserve. And so when this happened, essentially all of these tentacles started down this path of creating the idea that we are all global citizens. So at this point, it is my contention that we are either voting for Agenda 47, which is reinvesting in our country, in our borders, in our military, in our education, and all of that, going back to the Constitution, going back to rule of law, Bill of Rights, all the things that have been slowly but
Self-government,
surely,
consent to
yes,
the governed.
auto-determination, or we are going towards being global citizens, a cog in a globalist wheel, and they are running basically the controlled demolition of America and the liquidation of America. And frankly, when you look at the whole thing and you realize that in order to achieve these goals, they have to somehow get everyone on the planet onto a digital track and trace surveillance blockchain ledger technology system, which they already built in China. And I fully believe to spread it to the rest of the world. So if we do not right now understand that America as we know it is standing in the way of this. Donald Trump often says they're not after me, they're after you, I'm in the way. And what I beg Americans to understand on a human level is they're not after America, they're after the world, and America is in the way.
I agree
And
so
that is
wholeheartedly.
because of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our legacy and DNA of fighting tyrants and bullies. And right now, the entire world, despite what the fake media, which is all controlled by the global public-private partnership, is saying, is the rest of the world is really rooting for the American people to take their country back. And that's why I wrote Americans Anonymous, because I really went through how we got here, and that I feel that on a bigger level, we have been fed a diet of conflict and chaos that has become an addiction, basically, with information warfare, cognitive warfare, multiple terror events, and all these different things that have happened. And if you really trace the entire coup, sadly enough, it goes back to 1963, the murder of JFK, and the capture of our government. And at this point, we have an intelligence branch that is completely unconstitutional out of the unconstitutional Patriot Act that is working for the global public-private partnership parent company. And then on the other side, we have this evolution of this lawfare team, most of them DOJ officials under Obama. Now they're at Brookings and Just Security and States United. So that would be Norm Eisen, Weissman, Mary McCord, Bissett. And so they're using our legal system and manipulating wherever anything's vague or whatever into crimes that really are not crimes by using lawfare against Donald Trump, against any lawyer who questioned the election, against January 6 people. And on the other side, the intelligence community right now literally is Big Brother. We have watched and not paid attention to the danger that we are facing with the relationship between the DHS, NSA, and all of the things that spawned out of the Patriot Act with big tech, with the multinational corporations, and with the international banking cartel, all the way up to the Bank of International Settlements. So if you really take a step back, the reason that America has been going through, I believe, a full color revolution is because they never expected Donald Trump to win. When he won in 2016 and started dismantling this march towards, as George Bush told us on the floor of the United Nations, a new world order, a one world order, which was tripled down on, if you ask me, from the Project for a New American Century documents about the next 100 years of war, which was basically militarizing the world, using USAID, NED, all these other groups to force regime change to accept that this small group, I call them the Davos crew, but they meet at conferences, the COP conference, Bilderberg, Davos, the international global governance conferences. But if you look at the people that go, they're all the same. And so they've been building this for a very long time. And frankly, they've never been so close and they've never been this far because they believed, I'm sure people that watch this know that Klaus Schwab put out a book, the head of the World Economic Forum, called COVID-19, The Great Reset. And I fully believe not only when Larry Fink made his speech, I find him to be the most powerful person in this country above our government. He also, not only does he run BlackRock as the CEO, and that is about $14 trillion, much of it are public pensions of U.S. taxpayers, but also he is on the board of the World Economic Forum, one of the architects of the Great Reset, obviously also of the ESG score movement. He also is on the Council of Foreign Relations. And BlackRock is the only company in the world that apparently can freely do business in communist China without any interference. So if you look at all of that and then you think, well, where are we? And then you look at everything that BlackRock owns in America, which is basically everything on the New York Stock Exchange, you realize that it's kind of a corporatist takeover with a totalitarian bend that will be using technology and AI to track, trace, surveil every person on this planet from birth to death under the guise of these goals that they arbitrarily came up with. And their last bastion to get is America. If they do not get America to go onto this global public infrastructure, which was backed by Gates and all the same players that are, Eric Schmidt, who also built the track and trace surveillance model with Google China and other partners of the same ilk. But right now, with us giving our eye scans at the airport and using your hand to pay at, Amazon, or you're getting, they're forcing smart meters and smart technology into your homes. So this all leads to what they call the fourth industrial revolution. And many people have heard probably Noah Harari and other people at the World Economic Forum talk about this. It's actually the meshing of human life and technology for top-down control. So if the American people reject the central bank digital currency, reject a global interoperable world ID, and reject this entire movement, then we can turn the tide, have Trump win, throw sand in the gears of the global plan. But at that point, the people of the United States of America have to get to work. The win for Trump in 2024 is actually the win for us to have a chance to stand up, because if you look at the 27 grievances of the Declaration of Independence and you read them, it'll take all of 5 minutes. You'll realize that we are in the exact same place, except for this time it's not King George or a nation. It is a group of people that believe that they are above and superior stakeholders of this planet. And frankly, they put in all their documents on all their different websites. They're not hiding any of this at all.
They don't.
And the American people, because of our media, don't even understand. You are either voting for Agenda 47 and America, or you are voting for Agenda 2030 and for Americans to end up being global citizens. That is the danger. And Kamala Harris was Obama's pick to go in there. She couldn't get any traction. They picked the most compromised and easily manipulated person in Joe Biden, dropped all these executive orders, and now they're going to usher in Kamala Harris to take it to the end and basically cede our sovereignty, destroy and rip up our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and go for what is coming up at the end of this month. Summit of the Futures at the United Nations will be announcing a basically UN 2.0, our common agenda that would, and in this document, because the original UN charter kind of deferred to nation states.
Oh, very much so. Article
right.
2.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But this document doesn't.
Shut up.
And that is what's going on.
They are so brash, so
yeah.
I would say ballsy, but I never use that term. It's wow, where to go? Okay, firstly, I will say in affirmation of what you were talking about, this is just a side note about recruiting young people to become journalists, go to Columbia, infiltrate the halls of academia.
Right.
That actually happened to my brother. I mean, my husband. Sorry, not my brother. My husband was a Marxist in high school, and literally they came to him, tried to recruit him. They were going to pay full ride. I think he was supposed to go to Columbia and then become a professor and blah, blah, blah. He's just too much of a contrarian, and he eventually, of course, voted for Reagan the second time. But
right.
That does actually happen. What you just described, I've been following these things. I could not go on that monologue and be able to lay it out as beautifully as you just did. I think it's a work of art. But we've been following this for 30 some years, right. And it's all there. And they're very, very open with it. It's very dystopian to people like you and me. This is
Right.
dystopia. This is their great utopia.
Right.
Don't they have 10 regions? I seem to
Yeah.
remember seeing a map of the 10 regions.
Right. And it's very similar, unfortunately, to the movie Hunger Games, where they live in Pan Am. We're all track, trace, surveilled, and controlled by technology. And that's who they allow to live, because a lot of these people that are involved, not only are they have they taken the fraud that it is human caused climate change, and therefore humans have to change their behavior, but they
Denier.
all right, but they also have the entire thing about that we're overpopulated. That is not even remotely true at all. And again, we have to also look at the financial sector. So I think that more than anything else, their financial model is failing. And not just BlackRock, but a lot of the multinational corporations and certainly the banks up to BIS have invested fully financially in achieving Agenda 2030. So any chance that Trump comes back and pulls out of all those, which he should pull out of the United Nations as well, and also audit or at least find out what is going on at the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF and the World Bank, because they are funding a lot of this. The World Bank would be running the CBDC that Joe Biden put in the executive order for. The World Health Organization would run the entire health passport. You know, the IPCC would run the entire what they call climate trace coming out of the fraud that is carbon credits. So this has been a long...
When you brought up global education, I was thinking our country's education has been utterly destroyed since it went to mandatory, compulsory, government institutionalized education back in the mid 1800s.
Right.
And prior to that, well, that's a whole nother episode. But that's when it first became compulsory nationwide. And it was always, though, supposed to remain in the states. With the federal overlay of education, we have destroyed the minds, the hearts, the intellect of generations, not just one. I would say firmly one, but I'd say it goes back at least 2 generations that have been ruined. And well, it depends on how many years is in a generation, but nevertheless, the point is taking a global...
Yeah.
That's insane, because education, the very purpose of education is to take a culture and transmit it to the next generation. That means when I was born with an American birthright that included constitutional, Republican government, etc. And you could extrapolate from there, a Judeo-Christian foundation to our in society, personal living, blah, 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 all of it. That's my American birthright. My job as a parent and the job of any teacher is to transmit. Actually, in the old days, education it was called the transmission of morals, because it's how you look. Okay, communist China will transmit their culture to their next generation one way. But what you're talking about, Mel K, is taking it to a global education model. We're
already there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most people don't realize we're already there. There was so the Lucis Trust was started by Alice Bailey at the United Nations under Rockefeller. It used to be called Lucifer Publishing. It still has a meditation room there. Right.
You can look it up.
Yeah. Her counterpart was another Robert Mueller, who created the World Curriculum out of the Lucis Trust. Well, the World Curriculum has spawned the UNESCO. So UNESCO is the education arm of the United Nations. Well, UNESCO has something called Education International. Education International is exactly what has happened to this country. First, it became, and don't forget, on the Lucis Trust site, it used to thank Ted Turner, Bill Gates, and Soros. I don't know if it still does, but it did use
screenshots.
Yeah, I do have them, and I do, of course. But what really is happening, and this is really, really serious. They do not want small businesses. They do not want entrepreneurs. They do not want creatives. They do not want ingenuity. They do not want entrepreneurship. What they want is a class at the top and then everyone else to be at the bottom. That's why they're pushing universal basic income. But also part of the global public infrastructure is that all social safety nets will only be accessible if you agree to go on that global digital ID.
Sort of
So
like
all
the
of it is
Chinese
connected. Yeah, it's the China
credit,
model.
the China
Yeah.
model that Klaus Schwab loves.
Exactly. And so did Rockefeller, and so did Kissinger, and so did Bush, and so has everyone. But Bill Gates has talked about it. Larry Fink has talked about it, that how China runs its resources. But when they say resources, they mean people. They mean everything, natural resources, everything else.
If it's got blood in its veins, it's a
Right.
resource.
Yeah, but
And
they
the
also
tactics
believe-
of socialists, I'm just going to call,
No, go ahead.
the problem is people think that Europe is socialist and it's just really nice people trying to be compassionate. And what they do not understand is not everybody, a lot of people do, but Nazism is national socialism. They were socialized or socialists. They took over all the labor unions. They didn't hate labor unions. They hated labor unions if they weren't under the control of the Nazi party. And so national